participate in that at this point in time. But, so I wasn't originally supposed to be emceeing today, but our MC guy had some more important things to do, so I kind of get to announce myself in the panel, so that'll be awkward. But first, just some quick things. We do, if you haven't heard yet, we have a, scrolling up here on the screen, a bunch of people that we'd like to thank. This room is 100% run by volunteers who give their time and their money to make the whole thing happen. So you can, let's just give them all a round of applause. We do have a social room. It's just 2 doors down here. There's a lot of stuff going on in there, interesting things. There's some collection displays and some of the patches and other giveaways that some of the different clubs around the convention are giving away are shown in the case over there. But we also have this Vader art auction. So what we did this year in the spirit of the Vader head project that they've done at Celebration a few years back, we decided to take that theme and sort of make it into our own by doing it with toys, of course, as collectors. And so we got Vader cases and gave them to a whole bunch of artists and had them just go to town on them, making their own interesting creations. Not only are these available for viewing over there, but this is also a charity auction. So if you would like to take one of these home, you can go over there and make a bid between now and the bidding ends tomorrow at noon. So they've got a lot more details over there. But even if you're not interested in that, I would really encourage you guys to head over there and check them out because these pictures just do not do them justice. It's they're just astounding pieces of art. Tonight, right in this area, we also have a swap meet. So if you have anything you want to sell, or if you have anything you'd be interested in buying, it's sort of a social hour for collectors, and people have some things to buy and sell. So that'd be good if you want to come to that. Also new this year, we're doing some video reporting from around the con. So if you'd like to follow our video reporters, I'm one of them, and we have a couple others that are doing various kind of reporting. Download an app called Hang With, and once you get on there, follow Star Wars Celebration, and you can see all the interesting videos we've done over the week. We have some programs for sale. You can get those on your way out, and also there is a bin for your Star Tots. If you'd like to purchase those, you can get them on your way out. So this panel is Star Wars Pickers, and I'd like to introduce Bonnie Sharp, Shane Turgeon, Okay, so do we have any fans of American Pickers here? With Mike Wolf and Frank Fritz. So, if you're not familiar, the first thing we wanted to do is, what is picking? If you haven't heard this or you haven't watched the show, I'm going to define it a little bit more broadly than maybe what American Pickers does. I'm going to call it anything where you put some hard work in to get a collectible or something that you want at a cheaper price than just going out and just shelling out cash in the open market. So there's a number of ways you can do that, and that's what we're going to be talking through in this panel.
One of the things we want to talk about in addition to what picking is why we started doing this. I was in 10th grade art class drawing, kind of looking at the kid next to me saying, "You got any Star Wars toys at home?" And the phrase that seems to have been coming up the last couple years is finding stuff in the wild, in attics and basements. If anyone's enjoyed doing the garage sales and looking through people's stuff, you get a sense of how exciting that can be, flipping over box lids and not quite knowing what's in there. But I've been picking for a long time. Some of the questions I get all the time is, why do people still have this? A lot of people throw things out or give things to thrift stores years ago. And as you could guess, most of the stuff I find is just old childhood toys. I find purchase collections, played with toys that were belonging to people when they grew up. Not everyone strapped M80s to their action figures when they grew up. Not everyone doused their cloud cars in lighter fluid and lit them on fire and chucked them off roofs.
You did all those things?
I did none of those things. Look at the price tags on some of these old toys. They weren't necessarily cheap. I think a Millennium Falcon was like $50 even in the late 70s. And that was quite a bit more money back then. And folks like my parents didn't make a ton of money, and they kind of encouraged me to keep the stuff in decent shape. So when you kind of get older, and you don't want the stuff sitting around your bedroom, a lot of times it goes in the box in the attic until one of us comes and gets it.
So another reason that some people would say some things is just an appreciation for the films. I mean, I've met a lot of people who were adults at the time these films were out and just really loved them and just got toys. And fortunately, a lot of those people did not open them because they weren't buying them to play with. They were sort of buying them because they just appreciated the aesthetic values so they left them in their packaging. So a lot of times that's also why people would have pens.
We'd all like to think that we were smart enough back then to buy up a bunch of stuff and sit on it. But I have come across collections where people did exactly that. They go into a store, they load up a cart. I'll show you a find I had in a little bit. This couple did exactly that. And they sat on the stuff as an investment. Sometimes people handled it weird. I bought a collection of 300 vintage figures. A couple bought because they thought they'd be valuable. And in order to protect them, they carefully removed them all from their packages. Put some tissue paper down in the Darth Vader cases and carefully laid them in, and then very carefully clipped all the proof of purchases out of the cards. But
the last one is it was their handiwork. So this is really important when you're dealing with former employees from different companies that may have manufactured the toys that you're looking for. So it's for those of us who look for prototypes, pre-production material. A lot of the guys, they keep this stuff because they were, at the end of the day, they were proud of it. They were proud of the work that they did. They really enjoyed the line that they were working on, and it was just a nice reminder of the time that they had working on that stuff.
Okay, so the first half of this panel, now that we sort of define what picking is we're going to teach you guys some of our tips and tricks. So the first rule here is nothing leaves this room because these are our secrets. And if we have too many people doing this, we won't be able to find as much stuff. So
if you're from Cleveland, the Cleveland area,
You can leave now.
yeah. So picking basics. So first of all, you have to know your market. A lot of times when you're going into these situations, you will have to make evaluations on the spot, understand what you're looking at, how much it's worth. You're not going to be able to have time to pull out your phone and look up something on eBay, nor would you want to really do that in a situation like that. So you really need to know the market quite well. It's good to even have a breadth of knowledge outside of your particular realm. I know Shane knows a lot about G.I. Joes, for example, and Bobby knows a lot about just about every toy line on the planet. So even when you're running into Star Wars stuff, picking, you could run into other toy lines that may be valuable and worth you purchasing as well. So you really have to know the market. You have to have readily available cash. This is probably an obvious one, but I think a lot of people don't really realize that you really want to go into any kind of situation where you're going to pick, and you want to have cash in your pocket on hand. You really want to be able to walk away in your very first meeting with whatever items you were looking at. You don't want to have to come back or let me go get a cashier's check or I'll meet you tomorrow. As soon as you leave the door, the chance of the person selling to someone else or deciding not to sell just goes up exponentially. So you really want to have the cash ready to go. And this is the kind of area I put together. Just from my picking days, I've run into certain personality types, and you have to deal with them a little differently as far as trying to acquire their collection. The first I call the collector. This is the guy that bought the stuff, loves the stuff, doesn't want to get rid of the stuff. This is probably the hardest nut to crack because usually they'll let you come over and take a look at things because they're kind of proud of it. They want to show it off, and they're appreciative that somebody else is appreciating it. But they're really, really hard to get to actually crack. Usually you just have to work this kind of person over the long term, and eventually maybe you can get a few pieces out of them. The second one is the hard luck guy. So you would think this one would be sort of the easy one, but I've found that this one can be difficult just because they really are looking for top dollar, sometimes even unreasonable above market prices. So getting this kind of person to understand what really the market is and what is a picker, you never want to pay full market price. The whole reason you're doing this is you're putting in your personal sweat equity in order to get a little more value. So those are always hard to crack. It's just about talking to them and helping them understand the market. The wealthy, again, really tough one because they have no reason to sell you anything.
They don't need your money.
They don't need the money. Oh, I even if they don't have any interest. I've heard this many times, you guys probably have too. I really kind of like these, but they've been in your closet for 15 years. Yeah, but now I got them out, maybe I'll put them up on the mantle there or something. Like, you guys have probably heard those kind of stories. And so, throwing money at them doesn't really work. What I found is the best way here is to get them to understand your appreciation of the thing they have. Sort of go for the, I'm going to really appreciate this. I'm going to take really good care of it. I'm going to protect it, and it's going to be appreciated every single day. And sometimes that can kind of turn them around to selling. And the final one, which is my absolute favorite, the apathetic. Yeah, I got the stuff. It's been in my garage. Give me $50. You know, those kind of guys. I like that guy. You like that guy. And the last thing is just be prepared to walk away. I mean, you're not going to score every pick. If you go in thinking, you know, I've got to get every one, you're either going to overpay or you're going to be really disappointed. So just expect to walk away. Sometimes that can be a good strategy to actually get somebody to crack. If you say, you know what, that's my top offer. I can't go a dime higher. You know, oftentimes they'll relinquish and actually give you the deal.
I think all of us here have walked away, and it's played out in our favor. You know, whether it's an hour later or right then or a week later.
Half the time I've walked away, I end up coming back for whatever reason. Sometimes I walk away twice, but sometimes you come back again.
Next up, we're going to talk about the ethics of picking. So this is pretty important. Nobody wants to be the comic book guy from The Simpsons. You know, everyone I'm sure has walked into that comic book store and is like, well, you know, that's worth $1 and something's worth $100. You don't want to be that guy because your reputation is on the line. So don't lie is pretty much the first one. I mean, it sounds so much simpler than what it is, but it's amazing how many people will go in there and try to spin a yarn. And the best thing you can do is just be straight up front with people, help them understand why something is worth the money that it is. Especially because a lot of people like a little bit of information is too much information. So they'll look on eBay and they'll see something that's, you know, mint and sealed boxed, AFA 95, and they're going to think, well, this is worth $10,000. Like, well, okay, well, yours is, you know, it has the box, but the box has been peed on by cats. And four pieces are missing, and so it goes both ways. Like, don't lie and say stuff that's really good, because that's going to bite you in the butt too.
I think people are generally more intuitive than you give them credit for. When you come to someone's house to look at their toys and you're thinking about purchasing it, a lot of times those swindle radars are on. And I found that being direct and honest, people pick up on it and really appreciate it. That usually works out in your favor. And, you know, at the end of the day, this is supposed to be fun. And I don't want to buy someone's childhood collection and rip them off and drive them with that stuff in my car. It's just, it's not enjoyable. It's not fun.
No, you got to live with that conscience at the end of the day.
And again, your reputation is at stake. If anyone was in the panel on the oddities, the idea of your reputation, how it came up, and how important that is. It doesn't take long for you to rip 2 or 3 people off and have that get around. You will not be buying any toys.
And whether that's on a local level or an international internet level. And that ties into, like, your knowledge is worth something. So it's worth something to them, and it's worth something to, you know, everything that you're putting out there.
I always say about this, a lot of people think, like, as you're picking, like, you have this responsibility to completely inform, you know, the person you're talking to about every aspect of everything. And, you know, I feel like I put a lot of hard work into the knowledge I have of, like I said earlier, understanding the market. So oftentimes when I pick, you know, I will go in and I will offer up a price. I'll just say, well, here's what I'm willing to give you for these. If they want to know what the market value is, I usually kindly point them to eBay or something and say, you know, there's a lot of research out there. You can go look up. And if you decide you want to go a different way, that's fine. Here's what I'm willing to offer. And so don't feel like you have to, like, give up information, because your knowledge is worth something, and that's why you're there, and that's why they're talking with you, because they don't have the knowledge and you do, and you're trying to help each other out.
They require your expertise. That's why you've been called. Especially in my situation where I'm also a certified appraiser. So a lot of times people will call me and they'll just want to know, you know, the values of things, but that conversation can then turn into, like, well, I want to know the value, but I want to know the value because I want to get rid of it. Would you be interested in buying it? And that's where it all comes into play. It's with the making the offer, that's a tricky strategy too. You know, sometimes people have an idea in mind that they want, so you make the offer? Do you ask them if they have an idea in mind? And I usually kind of go in with see what they're interested in how much they want for it. But if they're way low, I'll always up the offer and be like, again, with that reputation of Paramount, I'll totally up the offer to make sure that it's in line with what it's really worth.
So we're going to go through now some of the actual ways that we do picking. The first one we're going to talk about here is eBay find. You think eBay, like picking on eBay, that doesn't seem like picking, okay? But I'm not talking about just going on eBay and searching. So the first thing to do is look in weird categories. So this is some stuff I found, I don't know how long ago this was now. I think it was right around Celebration 2 when I found this stuff. I was looking through a category on model kits. A friend of mine wanted a Star Trek model kit, and he didn't know how to use eBay, so I said I'd help him find the Star Trek model kit. So I was tooling around in that category, and up popped this auction for some of these like original artwork for screaming models. And I'm like, well, what's that? That's interesting. So I emailed the guy. I said, what's the story with this? And he said, well, I bought the building that the screaming model kit used to own, and when I went in there, there was a pallet in the back corner that had just this stack of folders with all this paperwork stuff in it. It was like layout boards for the packaging and things like that. I said, well, do you have more of this than just what you've listed on eBay? I think he had 3 auctions on there at the time, and I think there were 3 Vader pieces. He's like, oh yeah, I've got a whole stack of this stuff. So I bid on the one, bought that from him, and unfortunately the other 2 auctions got away to another bidder, but I worked with him to buy the rest of the stuff, and it was literally a stack about that high of all kinds of original artwork and board layouts and proof sheets and things like that for the Screaming Model Kit. So while the original auction was just an eBay thing that I stumbled upon, I turned it into a pick by digging deeper into what the guy had and what he was trying to do with that stuff. So also look for just bulk purchases. Again, as I defined it earlier, using your sweat equity to try to get better than market prices. Oftentimes large purchases on eBay will go cheap because either the price is really high, so you weed out a lot of bidders. I mean, if you can, this one you see here is like $8 grand, so if you can throw down $8 grand on some 12 bats, that's some cash, but you can get a really good deal. And then usually what I would do is maybe keep 1 or 2 pieces that I would like, pitch a couple of them out to some buddies, and maybe relist the other ones in a forum or something individually. The other thing is like the diamond in the rough. So this is, if you were in the Great Stories panel earlier, you heard this one already, but on the left there is a figure called Blix, which was never made in the US. It did get a limited release in Brazil, but it is an extremely rare figure, and especially the US version was only ever just prototypes that would come from Canada. So this auction here that you see on the right was listed on eBay. It happened to be right during the weekend of Celebration. So this guy that listed this had the just terrible dumb luck of listing this super rare piece, not only in sort of an obscure, with an obscure photo, and just like Daisy Duck and Star Wars and Flintstones toys was like the description. So the guy had no idea that Blix was a super rare figure. And he listed it on the one week when all the major Star Wars collectors were here and not on their phone, not on their laptops, and not really on the internet. So this figure at the time, probably, what do you think that Blix went for back then? Maybe $2,000, $3,000 at the time? Yeah. And this auction ended at $1.
Jeez. Oh my God.
So yeah, that's okay. And this
That's okay.
this Barney Rubble has kind of become a Star Wars collecting legend. People actually go and try to find that little Barney Rubble figure just sort of as a memento to the Blix auction. Yeah.
eBay's search engine, I think, has gotten a little savvier and catches things, but there was a day when you could buy up all the Hans Solo 12-backs you could get your hands on for nothing because people would
Misspellings. That's
like Darth Vader toys,
yeah.
cheaply had.
Stars War.
Yeah.
Stars War or Star War.
I think eBay has an autocorrect feature now on their search engine. That was quite fun.
And so there are always find picks even on eBay. It takes a lot of digging, and they're few and far between, but they are out there.
One of those common ways now that people are using to turn out finds is Craigslist. I'm Canadian, so in Canada we do have Craigslist, but it's nowhere near as popular as Kijiji. Kijiji is pretty much the end-all be-all for people looking for stuff. You can there's local searches and there's and there's you can search across different cities. You know, cities that are closer to you or people where you know that people live. The local search though is usually where everybody starts. The thing about searching on Kijiji and being successful is you kind of have to be on Kijiji all the time. This is there are people who that's all they do is sit on Kijiji and look for really good deals. So if you are going to use the Kijiji or the Craigslist route, you have to be very diligent. Checking it once or twice, a week is probably not going to net you any fantastic scores.
I usually focus my Craigslist stuff on like Saturday mornings. I'll make sure I try and check a couple times Saturday throughout the day, just on the idea that people have jobs and they're busy and they throw stuff on Craigslist. They're probably doing it over the weekend, so I'll check quite frequently over the weekend to try and find things. This find here you see in this picture is actually a Craigslist find I had last year. So it was a lot of modern stuff, but you can see about maybe a dozen or so vintage cards in the bottom there that was pretty good value.
And by all means, if you have the time to search often, you should be searching like every hour if that's your thing.
Even if you see something on Craigslist and the ad's 3 days old, you figure someone's already wrapped it up, it's sometimes worth a call because I've made calls on things like that. The person still has the stuff because they've had just really low ball offers. You get a string of people that think they're going to steal a decent collection for nothing. If you give them a fair offer, they still have the stuff in hand and run on the bottom.
That's where we come into the part of really the art of making the deal on Craigslist. The biggest problem that most people I know who I've suggested maybe selling on Craigslist, they don't want to deal with the tire kickers. So these are guys who are like, oh, okay, well, maybe I'm kind of interested. Maybe I'll give you, $100 less than you're out. Like, nobody wants to deal with that guy. They want to deal with the guy who comes in with a fat stack of cash, drops it down, buys it.
I'll be there in 2 hours. When can you meet me? Yeah, when can you meet me? As soon as possible.
Yeah, and especially if you see that it's a good deal on Kijiji, don't be a tire kicker. Again, that goes back to what we were talking about before, and the ethics of picking. Drop the money that they want, buy your stuff, get out of there, make it quick and dirty.
And if you're going to try to negotiate, do it in person. Don't send them an email. Well, would you take it? Just say, can I meet you? Can I see it? Once you're in there in front of them, and the stuff's there, and it's all laid out, and you have your cash in hand, that's the time maybe to not only to try and get a little better deal, but you've examined the material now and understand the condition better than just a photograph, so you can better judge the value, but also try maybe work a little better deal for yourself. But you want to do that in person. Once you're there face to face, they have a big incentive to get the deal done, because they just like, I want to get rid of this stuff. I don't want to have to go through 3 other people coming over here. So you're there, you're with cash. I find almost always with those Craigslist deals, once you get your foot in the door and you're talking in person, they almost always pan out.
Cash is king.
Actually all my biggest and best finds came from old school newspaper advertising. A lot of people sort of write it off because there's eBay and Craigslist is free and there's a lot of benefits to things like that. But the newspaper still has a certain reading demographic that are sort of the folks I want to hit. And the nice thing about running an ad is if someone contacts you, they've already decided to at least consider the fact that you'll buy this stuff. The downside to advertising is it's not free. Advertising in newspapers can be expensive, especially if you do it frequently. You have to put a lot of money up front. But in my experience, it's always eventually paid off. And there's been multiple times I've sort of been laying out money month after month running these ads and thinking, well, maybe I'm just going to stop doing this. Then I get a phone call, and sometimes it's a great collection I buy, and that sort of fuels the initiative to continue advertising. There are cheaper ways around it. I mean, everyone here is probably familiar with the fact that newspapers are ailing. They need your ad money, and if they think that you're going to have a consistent ad that you're going to run for a year, in my experience, they're usually willing to work with you on rates. I found that it's not necessary to run ads all the time. I usually stagger them. I'll run them for 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and I did some math for a while. I seem to get about the same amount of calls I got if I just ran them constantly. I think one of the biggest tactics I've had that works is I target advertising in certain neighborhoods. So I'm from Cleveland, and Cleveland's part of the Rust Belt. This is an area that was very affluent in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. There was a lot of stability, a lot of industry. People made pretty good money, and that's not the case anymore. Cleveland also has older neighborhoods, folks that have been living in their houses for 40 years, 50 years. When you move, you tend to throw stuff out. You edit your possessions. You're still in the house you were in 1955. You had your attics and you had your basement's full of stuff. These are the folks I'm trying to reach. They've got the good stuff. There's a lot of it out there. Smaller local publications have always done well. The big newspapers are great. Cleveland has a lot of smaller community newspapers. I advertise in those. The folks I'm trying to get to, the folks I'm trying to reach, do read these papers, and the advertising is usually a lot cheaper. So targeting older neighborhoods and using smaller community papers has probably been the two biggest keys to my picking success. And many folks just don't use the internet. I think there's this assumption that everybody is online and everyone uses Craigslist, and I know that's not the case with a lot of older folks in my family. And these are the folks I want to reach. They've got good stuff. They're willing to talk to you. They're friendly, and they just don't want to mess around with computers. They're intimidated by it. They don't want someone showing up at their house to get contacted over the internet, and I usually get pretty good response from folks like that.
Another really interesting way is just use your resources at your disposal. If you work in a company that has a lot of people, if they have company message boards, put up a sign on the company message board. I'm lucky I have a store, so I can put out on my store sign, buying old toys. That really helps to help attract, people coming in to sell you stuff as well.
And the next one we got is cold calling. There's Vader doing some picking right there. So the first thing with cold calling, I'm going to, again, broaden the cold calling, not necessarily always telephone, but I'll call this any approach where you're approaching someone that you're wanting to try and contact completely cold. They're not expecting you to contact them in any way or form. So the biggest one here would be different types of employees of places. So it could be toy company employees, it could be your local store employee who maybe your local store has a display that you really like, so you're contacting the store manager, something like that. So a lot of these tend to be employees, people that are kind of using the merchandise that you're wanting to buy, not necessarily people that collected it for any reason at all. So etiquette is super, super important here. And it takes a lot of practice to get this, because you've all gotten cold called right on your phone, and your radar instantly goes up, and you're like, okay, I don't want to. Why are you interrupting my day? I don't want to talk to you. You get the phone call. Yes, can I speak to Mr. Chris Fawcett, please? And instantly you're going, okay, you're not my friend. I don't know you. What are you selling me? So the first time, at dinner time. So the first thing you got to do, that's a big hard barrier to break down. So you have to be very, very genuine sounding. You have to get to the point quickly, and you have to make them try to quickly understand that you're interested in something that they may have. So you have to sort of turn that around so that they get the idea very fast that you're not asking them to do something for you, but you want to do something maybe for them. And once you get into that mode, they tend to open up. Getting your foot in the door is probably the hardest part. I mean, I've had leads, cold call leads, that took me 12 years to get my foot in the door. So sometimes you have to be very, very persistent with these kind of leads. And then finally, closing the deal, and just back to the same thing we've been talking about all along, cash is king. Always take it with you. Have enough. There have been picks I've gone on where I had no idea of what the person even had. It would be, I had a pick with a chemist sculptor one time, and I was like, well, what do you have? Well, I got a few things, come over, it's not very much. And I had no idea, and those kind of picks could be really expensive, or they could be $5. So you have to be prepared no matter what. And the one thing I learned is that always try to close the deal on the spot. There have been times where I've said, well, let me take a list down and go back and do some research, and sometimes the deal will fall apart, or it will go to somebody else, or the guy will decide not to sell. So once you've got your foot in the door, especially with these leads, and they finally agree to meet you maybe face to face, or take you to the back stock room to show you the displays they have, or whatever it happens to be. Once you're in there and they've sort of trusted you now, right? They've let you into their world. That's the time to close. Don't ever walk away from it, unless, of course, the price is just too high, as we said. I just had to put that in there.
I think as pickers, we all have this sort of innate love of, like I mentioned, going through stuff. Flea markets and swap meets are still good places to do this. I think with the internet and everyone kind of thinking everything is valuable, have this perspective that there's just nothing left that's not always the case. And while it's more difficult, this is not 1991 where I could walk into a flea market and fill my car with old toys, which I did for a long time. There's still stuff out there. One of the things I would advocate is look through boxes. Star Wars toys or any old toys sitting on tables, especially at 9:30 when the flea market's already been cruised along for 3 hours, are either going to get picked off right away or they're really overpriced. It's the stuff in the boxes under the table that's worth finding. We had a picture of the Brazilian figure up there that's worth quite a bit of money. My guess is that the local flea markets around where I live, folks wouldn't know what that is. That would get passed over. Folks would assume that's just some modern toy or something, and I wouldn't know what it is. So there are stories of people rummaging through boxes.
Yes, let me give one of those stories. So I was at a flea market. I live in Charlotte. I was at not a flea market. It was like a toy show where a bunch of dealers, kind of like an exhibit room down there, with a couple collectors. This was just only 3 or 4 years ago, and we were walking around, and one guy started digging through some boxes, and we're like, yeah, whatever. We kept moving along. Comes back later, and it turns out what he found at the bottom of that box was a weapon accessory for an unproduced Kenner Star Wars figure that was probably worth $1,000. It was a club for a figure. It was like a club for a figure called Bondo, and how that thing got to North Carolina, I have no idea. How it got to the bottom of that bin filled with random toys, no idea. That will always be a mystery. But the fact that it was there, the person clearly had no idea what it was. And Chris recognized it. It's my friend Chris, because he knew his market. He knew what those things were and what they were looking for. And he recognized something that nobody else recognized. So at the bottom of the bin, I don't know how much he bought it for. It probably was only a few dollars. So he $4. Jeff right here in the front row was one of the guys with us at the time. So he bought that for $4 and it's probably worth $1,000. So that was a good trade.
Yeah. And knowing your market is key too. Like I said, I'm from Canada, and the Canadian market back in the 70s and 80s had a lot of exclusive action figures. One of the most famous being not a Star Wars figure, but the humanoid figure from Black Hole. And I know a few people who have just been digging at the bottom of those dollar boxes and have pulled out Black Hole humanoids for $1, and that's a $1,000 figure all day long. So it's always worth knowing exactly what is where you were from.
Yeah, even just do some research on a bunch of different lines and what is the rarest stuff in each line, so you know what to be looking out for.
Still get there early. I mean, a lot of flea markets have the same people that set up every single week. If you get there early enough, you get the other folks that they set up once every few years when they clean out your stuff. The early bird gets the early bird kid.
All right, so that's our picking lesson. Would you guys like to see some stories and pictures from some of our best picks?
Yes.
All right, Shane, you're gonna go first here.
Yeah. So I've been lucky that I travel a lot and I interact with a lot of people all over the world. In what I do I wrote a coffee table book on Star Wars tattoos, so I met a lot of people through doing all that. And one of the coolest ones I had was with somebody from Brazil who used to work at Glasslight, or Glasslight as we commonly call it, which was the factory that produced the Star Wars toys in Brazil. He contacted me out of the blue. He didn't speak English, I didn't speak Portuguese, so then we needed a third person to help negotiate the deal from Brazil. And I managed to get a lot of really cool internal stuff and some sealed stuff. So I got some sealed product, I got a lot of Glasslight catalogs, and then I got the proof sheets to all of the catalogs, as well as what they call photolitos, but they're basically the CYMK color separations for both the droids card backs and the Power Force card backs.
And it should be noted that these production figures are fairly hard to find and fairly expensive, so to get pre-production prototypes for an already rare figure is pretty amazing.
International pre-production material is incredibly rare. This was a local one for me, and in fact, this was one of the ones that I walked away from. The guy wanted a certain amount of money. I said what my highest offer was. It wouldn't go any higher. I walked away, and he called me back a week later. The nice thing about this guy is he had no idea how to use eBay. He didn't have an email address, so if he wanted to sell it, he needed to deal with somebody who had cash in hand and was ready to deal. Tons of boxed Canadian items, including special offer line of Jawas. You can see there was 2 Mountain Jawas. Basically, this guy, he got everything as a kid, played with it once, put it back in the box with all of the inserts, and tucked it away. There was also...
So that's a weird kid right there.
Yeah. My favorite part of this find, and again, a lot of times when you're going into these things, you don't have time to look everything over. There's this story and the next one are perfect examples of some of the surprises you can get after it. There was a bag, just a brown paper bag. I didn't even look in it. He called me and said he had a bunch of modern figures, and I walked in and it was all vintage stuff. Didn't even look at the bag, took everything, got home, set it all in my basement, was going through the stuff, a few days later. I opened this bag, and there's two carded figures, one of which was a Canadian sticker, Return of the Jedi transition figure, which are quite rare. And again, this is a different find. This is, again, there's another vinyl from Jawa in there, but the best part of this is he had a stack of like records and books and storybooks and all that stuff, and they were just wrapped in a piece of cardboard. And I was like, okay, I just looked at it, didn't think anything of it. It was just a brown piece of cardboard with an elastic band around it. There was so much good stuff. Again, it was mint. There was all kinds of stuff from different toy lines. There was a lot going on in my life at the time, so I didn't get much of a chance to kind of look through this collection right away. So I had it sitting in my spare room for 2 weeks. Finally started going through it. I unwrapped all of the records and books, and there was a Canadian Empire Strikes Back store display header, of which there was, I think at the time, maybe 3 known in the world. And so I just ended up getting a great piece that I didn't even know was in there after the fact, because sometimes you just have to do these deals so quick.
I've had several stories like that too, where I find something afterwards that I didn't notice when I did the pick, and it was way better than what I thought it was.
Yeah, like that sort of thing. And actually, I just met the guy here at Celebration who I sold the store display to. So that's kind of cool to come around. This is one of my favorite ones. I got an email. I put on collectible shows and comic book conventions at home, and I got an email from somebody saying they used to do shows, and they were wondering, if I had any space left for vendors. Said, yeah, I did, but it turned out they wanted to just kind of sell everything in one shot. They lived 3 hours from where I was, and I said I'd drive out there and check everything, depending on what they had. And they said it was all vintage Star Wars toys. We go out, we get into his garage, and the whole one wall of his garage is stocked, floor to ceiling with boxes. We start looking through them, and it's all modern stuff, and I'm kind of getting a little nervous, thinking if this is what he thinks is vintage. We got about a quarter of the way through, and sure enough, there was nothing but boxed vintage stuff. This was everything that I found. I packed my truck. I have a Blazer. I packed it as full as I could with 3 people. My friend Luis Gomez was living from Mexico. We packed it all full. Well, actually, we got everything out of the garage, and he's like, there's more in the basement. He had this little cold storage room, and it was almost like a clown car where he kept pulling more stuff out of this tiny room. Like, I don't know how you fit everything in there. I packed the Blazer full, and I had to go back the next meeting with a trailer to pick up all the rest of it. There was so much stuff. I ended up becoming quite close with the family, and then I bought out all the modern stuff a year after that as well. And this last one is, again, talking about international picks. We were in Mexico. We went and visited a known Mexican collector, and he arranged for us to visit the old department store where everybody shopped for their toys when they were kids. And we walk in, and I'm thinking, we get to check out their warehouse and their storage room. So I'm thinking we're going to go into a place with racks and nice shelves and Lily Letty boxes all over the place. We walk into the place, and it used to be this beautiful, opulent department store, and you have to go up to the 6th floor. And when you get to the next floor, it's just getting dustier and dirtier and darker. And we finally get to where the toys were stored, and it was hundreds of garbage bags full and covered in dust, and it was like absolutely the most disgusting place I have ever been. And there was no licensed stuff, but like it was a bootleg mecca from every toy line. There was like a full garbage bag of Lion-O from Thundercats of like these gauntlets, and another full garbage bag of the swords. We only found a few Star Wars pieces out of this, but you can see there's like a lot of Thundercats, Masters of the Universe, superpower stuff.
How much of that did you get through?
We did. No, I mean, we had some people in our party who were not really keen on being there for as long and digging through all of that stuff. It was really fun, but it was really disgusting. You can see Christopher Julius, he's in the photos as well. And Chris wanted to go back. Like, he wanted to come back like 3 months later with like masks on, hazmat suits, and go through everything. I was like, dude, you are on your own with that. There was like broken baby doll heads and arms and all kinds of like weird stuff. But it was, I love to travel, and to be able to do picks while you're traveling is an excellent experience.
All right, moving on to Bobby's picks.
All right. I divided my picks into sort of small, medium, and larger finds. And these are just some pictures of sort of representative of smaller finds at the bottom here. A couple cases In the upper right-hand corner is a bunch of stuff I bought off of someone my father works with. So again, another good way to sort of get inroads to people that have this stuff. But at the upper left, I have some sealed wax boxes of vintage Topps cards. And Chris talked about personality types and who you're going to have to deal with. And the fellow I got these from, I was buying stuff from him for years. He acquired a storage unit full of uncirculated Topps product, and I spent years buying from him. But I had to play the game. He would meet me. I was never allowed to look at the storage unit. He'd meet me and sell me 10 boxes of Star Wars cards, but I also had to buy a box of old National Geographics. Next time I meet him, he had some Star Trek cards and Michael Jackson cards and Star Wars cards. But I also had to buy a set of 1950s encyclopedias. So I think being able to be patient and work with people and humor them goes a long way.
Yeah, we didn't mention that. Patience is so key to picking. I've had leads for decades. You just have to keep working and working and working.
Appreciate quirky people because here's a medium find. This is we talked about reasons people save this stuff. This was saved by a woman her kids loved old toys. Or they weren't old when they were young. They loved Star Wars. They loved G.I. Joe. And she had the foresight when she was buying stuff to sort of buy them two of everything. So she takes her kid out and buys a Darth Vader figure. She bought one to put away for Christmas. She bought an X-wing, a couple of figures. She bought doubles of them, put them away, so that when he turned 25, she could take them up the attic and say, "Hey, look, these are all your old toys still packaged." She did that. But I'm glad he went because she called me and I got to buy this stuff. And that's happened more than once. Here's another example of a medium find. This is, I think when your finds get pretty big, you have to think of logistics. There has to be somewhere to put this stuff. And there has to be places to stage it and clean it. And Shane mentioned finding stuff after you buy it. There's got to be some ways to do that. I've lost my garage for months at a time. This was purchased by someone that saw Star Wars when it came out and wanted to do stop motion recreation. He got about halfway through it. So all this stuff had been opened. He opened it, he filmed the scenes, and then he packed everything back up. It was perfect. He does not have a movie. I would love to see his stop motion movie. This is another big find I did with my buddies Mark and Dave. This took up my garage, obviously, and it's spent several weeks going through it. The story behind this one is the place I got it from. It's interesting. It's not really a story that I should probably share here because the fellow was odder than a polite company would allow me to say. But if you find Dave, it'll be after here. I'll tell you what it was. And then this is examples of just an enormous epic find I found. There were 532 carded figures. There were over 300 boxed vehicles and playsets. It was literally a basement full of stuff. This basement was filled with Kitty City bags and Children's Palace bags with receipts from 1981. The couple I bought this from went and saw Star Wars after it had been in the theaters for a year, fell in love with science fiction, had no kids, and just bought and bought and bought and chucked this stuff in the basement for years. I don't even like thinking about it, but I almost didn't go to this house. I wasn't buying actively at the time. This woman had called me, told me she had old toys, I moved her off. And, it was actually the day I was getting ready to move out with my girlfriend. I went to pick up the truck. It happened to be in the neighborhood, so I stopped by and came back with the truck. It took several trips, and it was amazing. Some of the key pieces that came out of that was a box, Empire Strikes Back, special offer display stand, several boxes of 12 bags. It went on and on and on. I'm still friends with the folks that I got this stuff from. And I also, there was 532 carded figures. I found this stuff 1 month after finishing my carded figure set.
All right, moving on to some of my picks. So we didn't talk about a term called new old stock, NOS. And that's basically like the wax boxes of cards, Topps cards, probably was talking about. That'd be basically stock that got put in a warehouse or something and just left there. So this was a pick actually just from last year, and I want to highlight this one because the story was interesting, even though the items weren't that great, but the volume was immense. So I had developed a lead for some Sigma ceramics, so like the Yoda mugs and the Chewbacca banks and all that from the early 80s. And I contacted a friend of mine, Todd Chamberlain, because I wanted to ping him for some prices, because I wasn't really that familiar with the prices. Turns out, we started talking and realized that this was maybe the same lead. He's like, is this guy in Ohio? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I think that's the same lead. Well, to make a long story really, really short, and I'll be happy to go into details afterwards, it turns out that they actually were two different leads, and my lead had stuff that was stolen from his lead. So the police got involved, and anyway, the story has not ended yet. I have not heard from him recently. This was just this Christmas, last Christmas, so I've not heard from the legitimate guy, whatever happened with the police report. But once me and Todd figured that out, and we figured it out after I had visited my lead and taken some pictures, and then we realized it wasn't the same person. So we sort of retooled, and then Todd hooked me up with his guy because I was in Ohio visiting some family, and so he took us to this warehouse stacked with these boxes of new old stock, Sigma stuff.
It's a small world because I was offered stolen stuff.
Oh yeah, that's right. I called. How did we connect in that? I forget.
He called me and offered me some of the stuff I would buy, and I said,
"Oh, that's right."
Sounds awfully familiar.
Because Bobby is still connected with a store that sells stuff in Cleveland, and I was up there. I'm like, well, maybe they'll want to take that store will want to take some of this stuff, so I don't have to call all the way home because I already knew I would have to rent a U-Haul trailer to get all this stuff back.
Chris called me, offered me this stuff, and I'm thinking, well, I had this other guy trying to sell me something, and then talked to him, me, it might have been stolen. So
it was just one of the craziest picks I've ever had, just as far as the story goes. So anyway, here it is, all pulled into my brother's office. There's me and Todd there on the left. Once I hauled it down to his house, and it was, you can see in the background there were some cookie jars, Chewbacca banks, Chewbacca mugs, Yoda mugs, pencil trays, and I think there was a total of 600 pieces or so in this find. So just one of the bigger finds I've ever had. I think it's one of the only warehouse finds I've ever had, or new old stock warehouse type stuff. Also last year I had this one, which came from a photographer and advertising guy who made, back in the 80s, Kenner did a promotion for a ride-on speeder bike toy. It was a contest. And this guy was hired to do a design for the store display and also some advertisements for newspapers. So he made up the store display and mocked it up and took pictures of it and created the advertising. So Kenner had sent him a couple boxes of carded figures to put in his display so that his photography looked like it was a full display with figures like you'd see in the store. So it was like a catalog that would go out to the merchandisers so they could see, hey, we want you to invest in this display and this contest, and here's what it looked like in your store, and he was doing that kind of photography. So all these figures were never in the retail. They went straight from Kenner right to this advertising guy, and he had them for years and years and years. And this is another lead that I probably worked on this about 10 years, and I kept contacting the guy, and like, can you get those things out? And I eventually realized he was just too lazy to be able to get them out. So what I decided to do was find a collector that was local to him, because he was in New York, and arrange for them to meet. And once they met, again, everything started falling in place and clicking. So it's so important to get in front of people live. Okay, this next one is the one that hurts the most, because this is the one I lost. 3 prop blasters from Return of the Jedi. These did come to market later. So I was contacted by this guy, and the story was his girlfriend was the former girlfriend of one of the guys who made props for Lucasfilm. And she had these, I guess it was kind of a nasty breakup, and she ended up with the gun somehow. So I did verify that these were legit, and like I said, they came to market later. I kept trying to arrange, was it somewhere out west? I can't remember exactly where, northwest. And I kept trying to arrange to go visit him, and then one day he just went dark. He stopped answering my emails, and then a few months later, his cell phone didn't work, and it was just gone. So that one killed me. 3 prop blasters. So I've also done a lot of picking at Kenner. here's just some pictures of some things I picked. That upper left picture is Gus Lopez in our hotel room. We would go down to Cincinnati for a weekend, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Literally fill up the hotel room with toys, and prototypes, and catalogs, and paperwork, and all kinds of things. That's just one shot there of the bed. You see some rocket fets on the upper right. I've discovered 5 rocket fets in my picking days. If you don't know the story, that was an unreleased toy that they never put out. It's kind of like the holy grail of action figures. The bottom left there are some first shots. That was another lead that I worked for about 12 years and just finally scored those this last summer. And on the bottom right is the one I was talking about earlier, that sculptor that said, come on over and I got some things, you have to come see it. And then we get there and he pulls out boxes of unproduced droids and Ewoks figures, including two sculpts, one of the few known clays sculptings of any figure, hard copies. It was just a crazy amount of stuff this guy had. Here's some more pictures. There's a more wider shot of the room there with Gus at the bed, and you can see Todd Chamberlain's there at the computer. We would get back at the hotel at 10 or 11 o'clock at night after meeting our last lead and stay up till about 3 in the morning doing cataloging, just literally going through every box and counting everything and making a spreadsheet and trying to assign values to things. In the top left there is a pick I had that's that is a one-to-one concept art painting from Kenner that the designers used to pitch the toy concepts to executives. So before they were given the green light to go spend a bunch of money to go into production on this thing, they would just make drawings and things. They pitched the toy. So it's quite large. It's about this big. And in the bottom left there is a pic those are the original photography samples used on the first wave of Power of the Force 2 TIE Fighter and X-Wing. What they did is they took vintage toys and repainted them how they would want them to look for the new line, use those for photography for those boxes. So that's the box photography models there. So, is there really still stuff out there? That's probably a question that everybody asks. And I would say absolutely, because this is a pick I scored 1 week ago. Full set of 12 backs, 20 backs, and some Empire figures. I think it was a total of 30. The first 34 figures were from the card back were in this find. It came out of Boston, and we call it an attic find or a basement find. It was just somebody who had these figures, and they were been in the attic for a long time, and there's a whole story behind it. So, yes, there's still stuff out there. There's still great stuff out there. I had one of my best picking years ever in 2014. I don't know why, just suddenly started doing really, really good. Hadn't had that much movement of things in quite some time, but so there's absolutely stuff out there. All right. We have about 10 minutes. Any questions? There's a mic here if you want to come up to the mic if you have any questions. No question?
One question.
Yeah.
Tell me about guilt. Any guilt? Have you had any guilt with somebody that you know that ran it up?
I've only had one thing I felt guilty about, and it drove me to make sure I was always ethical. And that was, there was one time very, very early in my picking career where I showed somebody a price guide that was rather old and based my offer on that price guide. And I feel horrible about that to this day. I felt horrible about it right after I left, and I've never done anything like that again.
I think there's maybe a couple instances of residual guilt where you buy something, especially early on in my sort of the picking part of my hobby, where I didn't know as much as I should have, and I bought something that ended up later being quite valuable. I just didn't know what it was. I bought things that are particularly good pieces that sat the bottom of boxes in my bedroom for years because I didn't know it at the time. You find it, and you kind of realize what it is. And like, oh, I didn't pay that much for this, but again, you didn't know. It's not deliberate deception. It's just, especially starting off for the internet, for the hobby, and sort of coalesced, and everyone that was learning about this stuff started exchanging notes. There's a lot of stuff you just didn't know about.
Over here, front row.
Do you guys have a hard time separating what's your business and what's your personal collection?
Well, for me these days, there's not a lot that goes into my personal collection, and having a shop, it's kind of nice just to have a shop full of awesome stuff. That said, like Chris said, I'm also into G.I. Joe. So if I buy a loose G.I. Joe collection, every Cobra Soldier, every Viper, every Night Viper, all the Army builders somehow manage to come home with me, and everything else goes to the store. But for the most part, for me, it's business unless there's an absolutely a key piece that I've been wanting for years.
See, I don't really view it as business. I do this because I want to enhance my own collection. So I'm not doing it to make money. I have a day job. If I'm buying stuff and flipping stuff or trading stuff, I get a lot of stuff. I use it as trade bait to get other things that I want, or I'll buy stuff and then sell it for a profit in order to go buy something else for my collection. So I'm not using this really as sort of a profit center.
I use it for groceries.
I reached the point where everything I had that was reasonably affordable, I could buy, or everything I could buy that was reasonably affordable, I already had. Like this, this became a way for me to afford other pieces of my collection.
Yeah, pieces maybe you couldn't have afforded without putting in this hard effort.
Buy a car full of stuff, sell it off, keep a couple things, and use the proceeds to buy that one piece and chase it after for years. And you get to the point where you can make your hobby pay for itself, and that's huge.
Back here.
I have a few of those ways. Like usually I go in the house and talk to people. It's like, oh, that's gonna be sick bad.
Yeah.
What do you do with that as far as being at the goal and but not pushing it?
My strategy there would be just keep asking. Be constantly overly nice, but just keep asking. You know.
I've worked in retail and I've been the guy going to retail to ask for them. And quite often you say, hey, you know what, can I just leave my number on a sticky note and you can just put it behind it or something, or keep it in your office? 9 times out of 10, that display does not have to go back. And if they, at the point where they're going to throw it out and your name and phone number are on the back of that thing, they're going to call you.
And half my picking is actually probably garbage picking. So there's always they throw stuff out, go jump in the dumpster.
So you guys mentioned a lot about like AI and stuff. How do you guys deal with like sniping now? There's a lot of like programs that kind of just get stuff at the last minute and that takes a lot out of like getting really good.
Yeah. The stuff I'm looking for on eBay is.
Yeah.
Yeah. The question is, how do you deal with like sniping on eBay? So like automated programs and sniping programs. The stuff I'm doing on, occasionally I'll have a piece that's listed in a normal category and I just want it for my collection. I sometimes use those services, but as far as picking goes, the stuff I'm picking off of eBay, you got to find stuff that nobody else is looking at. And at that point, sniping is kind of irrelevant because you're crossing your fingers that you're the only guy that saw this. Right?
Or wrong categories.
Wrong categories or things like that. Any other? Go ahead right here. Sorry.
Yeah, what is your offer to somebody? Half? A third?
Oh, like the percentage.
You said you don't
Yeah.
feel guilty. Where does the guilt cut off?
The guilt for me cuts off at how hungry I am. I always offer the lowest I'll ever go is half. But if it's something that's really, really, really good, I'll pay higher than half just to ensure that I can get it.
For me, it's really not about a percentage. It's about if the person I'm dealing with feels like I've been honest with them and made them a good deal. So I've had times where I've offered 25% and they were perfectly happy with that, and times where I had to offer 80% because that's all they would take. So I don't think there's really a line there for me. It's more about making sure that both parties feel like they were treated fairly, whatever that number happens to be. So we are going to have to wrap this up, but the three of us will be right next door.